All right, y'all, we're going to get started here soon, so if you want to go ahead and get all your stuff. All right, we'll give everybody a second to get their stuff and come in and have a seat. All right, y'all. So glad to be here with you guys tonight. So glad that you guys are able to be here for the Pastor's Bible Study. As you notice, I'm not Pastor Adam. If y'all don't know me, my name is Blake Fonder, and I'm the middle school pastor here at Englewood. I've been here for 8 years as the middle school pastor. So thankful and appreciate Pastor Adam inviting me to come and do the Pastor's Bible Study while he's gone. So excited to be with you guys today. So y'all are my normal crowd. I'm used to working with 6th through 8th graders, so 11 through 14-year-olds. So if you guys, no, I was just going to say, I might need y'all to make me feel more like home. So if you want to interrupt me and play tic-tac-toe a little bit there, it'll make me feel more like I'm with my crowd of middle schoolers, make me feel more comfortable around here. But but I'm super, super thankful to be with you guys. And I always like to start, especially if I'm doing a study, I like to start with an icebreaker question that I want you to talk about at your table to get things rolling. So it actually ties into our lesson, so it has a double purpose, to get people talking, and it ties into what we're talking about today in our book. So at your table, if there's nobody at your table, you can get a neighbor by, but I want you to tell everybody at your table how many siblings you have, and are you the oldest, middle, or youngest child? So at your table, take a second, talk about how many siblings do you have in your family did you grow up with, and are you the youngest, the middle child, or the oldest? So take a second at your table and talk about how many siblings. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to take a poll of the room. How many youngest children do we have in the room? You're the youngest of your siblings. That's me too. I'm the youngest. All right, who's middle children? All right, and the oldest siblings. We got a good mix then. Yeah, we got a good mix of middle, old, and young in here. Only child. Well, I guess you could raise your hand whichever one you wanted to. Then you could be the oldest, youngest, and middle, if you're the only child. But I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest in my family of 4. I actually have a twin sister, so I have 2 older sisters and an older brother. But I'm the youngest out of 4 in my family. But I just want to start with that with you guys, just to talk a little bit about the book we're talking about tonight. But I'd like to tell you just a little bit more about myself. Most of you guys have seen me before, but I started here in 2016 as the middle school pastor. I was actually an educator for 7 years before that, taught middle school math for 7 years leading up to a feeling called to ministry, full-time ministry in 2016, and I've been at Englewood since then. February will be start of year 9 for me at Englewood. So I love it. I love Jesus, and I love teenagers, and I love telling teenagers about Jesus. So that's what I've been doing since I've been here, and I love it. And I appreciate Pastor Adam trusting me enough to give me the opportunity to come and share with you guys today. So if you have your Bible with you, we're actually going to be doing a whole book today, y'all, a whole book of the Bible. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's the book of Obadiah. So we're going to be looking at Obadiah today. It's 21 verses, so it's going to be, we're going to break it up into parts, but that's the book that we're going to be studying in the Old Testament today is the book of Obadiah. Yeah, right before Jonah, all the minor prophets. So we'll give you all a second to get there because that's what we're going to be sitting and studying and looking at is the book of Obadiah. While you guys are getting there, I'm going to tell you a little bit of background before we jump into the book of Obadiah. It is the shortest book in the Old Testament, being 21 verses. We actually don't know much about Obadiah himself, other than he's a minor prophet, and this is the vision that God gave to him, is this book of Obadiah. But other than that, we know that the name Obadiah is used around a dozen times in the Old Testament. We don't know if this is one of those names that's used or if this is the only instance that he is talked about in the Old Testament of Obadiah. But we know this, that the book of Obadiah, that God gives him a vision, and it's about the country of Edom, or the nation of Edom, and it focuses on the distress and restoration of one nation and the judgment of another nation. So I want to tell you a little bit, so as we start reading, you're going to see the nations used are called different names. It's the same nation, but Obadiah, the writer, uses different names to talk about these nations. So I want to tell you a little bit about those. So as we're reading, you can understand what nation he's talking about. So here we're going to see two nations talked about today. It's Israel and Edom. And we know that going back all the way to Abraham, we know that Abraham, the promise given to Abraham, was that he would be many, that he would have, he's God's chosen people, and that he has a land that God was going to give to him. We know that Abraham had the son Isaac, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob named Israel, so that's where Jacob's descendants were Israel. We know that through Jacob is the line that leads to Jesus. And then Esau is the nation that started Edom. So Esau's descendants are Edom that we're talking about today. So we're talking about Isaac's twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Jacob descendants were Israel, God's chosen people, and Esau's descendants were Edom. So we see these two nations start from these two brothers. The cool thing is, there's a lot of people don't know, is that God gave Jacob and Israel the Canaan, the promised land, but he also gave Esau the land where they are now. So in Deuteronomy 2, verse 5, you'll see that God gave Esau the land that we're going to be talking about today, Edom, was given by God as well. So both brothers were given the land that they possessed and that we're going to talk about today. So I was going to show a quick picture of what we're talking about. Is it on? So today we're going to be talking about these two countries. So we know Israel was the descendants of Jacob. We know at one point that Israel is broken up into two kingdoms, and that's where we are here. We're talking about the two kingdoms. We're mainly going to be talking about the southern kingdom of Judah, the two tribes, and Jerusalem. So today the book of Obadiah mainly is going to be talking about the kingdom of Edom and the kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem. As we dive in today. But you're going to see Edom talked about the hillside of Esau. That's just Edom, his descendants. So if you see Esau, the country from Esau, that's Edom. When it talks about Jacob, it's referring to Judah, and it refers to Jerusalem as well. So we're going to see that a lot today as we talk about the book of Obadiah, and we see restoration happening, we see judgment happening with these two countries. But Isaac's two sons, Edom being Esau, Judah, Israel being Jacob, is where we're going to jump in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it up into 4 parts. It kind of naturally breaks up into 4 parts, and after each part, I want to allow some times if you have a question or comment about that section, I would love to help navigate through those questions and talk about that. But what I want to do is I'm going to read Obadiah 1 through 9 to begin, and then pause and see if we have any questions or comments for this. So 1 through 9, in my Bible, I'm reading out of the CSB. It titles these verses 1 through 9, Edom's certain judgment. So here's what verses 1 through 9 says. The vision of Obadiah. This is what the Lord God has said about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy has been sent among the nations. Rise up and let us go to war against her. Look, I will make you insignificant among the nations. You will be deeply despised. Your arrogant heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, in your home on the heights, who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you seem to soar like an eagle and make your nest among the stars, even from there I will bring you down. This is the Lord's declaration. If thieves came to you, if marauders by night, how ravaged you would be. Wouldn't they steal only what they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, wouldn't they leave some grapes? How Esau will be pillaged, his hidden treasures searched out. Everyone who has a treaty with you will drive you to the border. Everyone at peace with you will deceive and conquer you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you. He will be unaware of it. In that day, this is the Lord's declaration. Will I not eliminate the wise ones of Edom and those who understand from the hill country of Esau? Teman, your warriors will be terrified, so that everyone from the hill country of Esau will be destroyed by slaughter. So here we see in this vision given to Obadiah, the judgment of Edom. And you see, he uses different things. He says Edom, he says the hill country of Esau. Teman is also a part of Edom as well here. But what we see in these first 9 verses is the coming judgment to Edom because they're an arrogant nation deceived by pride. So really it's pride that is their downfall. And we know in Scripture, God talks about how he hates pride, and we know that with pride comes destruction, and we know that an arrogant spirit comes a fall. And we see that here happening with Edom. So why did they have pride? Why were they a prideful people? That's what I want to talk about with you first right here as we get started. So their pride came because where their city was located or where their nation was located, the treaties with the nations that were around them, and their reputation for being a wise people and a smart people. So this built up pride in that nation. So it was a very prideful, very arrogant nation that we read through here. Not only were they prideful, they thought they were untouchable. They thought they were an unconquerable people, not only by the nations, they thought they were untouchable by God. They thought they were immune to divine intervention. So they thought, hey, these nations can't touch us and God can't touch us. So that's how prideful this group of people has become. So these descendants of Esau, this pride has swelled up in this group of people. And that's what's leading to this judgment, to this vision that Obadiah is giving them. So God tells them right away, you are an arrogant people, you're a prideful people. In this judgment, he says there's not going to be anything left of Edom. No people, no remnant left at all. Everything that they relied on besides God would be gone in that country. So what I want to show you is I want to show you a current day picture to help you understand this is where some of their pride comes from, is where they were located. They thought that nations around them couldn't touch them, but it's modern day where the marvel or Petra is. So the picture, the first one is they were in the mountains. So you see a lot in the verses here. It talks about they were in the clefts of the rock. They lived like this. The nation was it was very mountainous. So they were protected a lot by mountains in the area that they lived in. So we see their location, they thought, which was a good location for a nation if they wanted to feel protected. But this brought about pride because they thought they were unconquerable and untouchable people because of that. Also, to get to a lot of these places in these cities, you see this is another modern day picture, is you had to go through these narrow passages and walk through here. So they were very protected where their city was. So we see that's some modern day pictures of this area where Edom is for that. So they felt pride, and that brought about pride because of that, where their city was located. Also, they had a lot of treaties with the nations that were around them. So they were like, all right, we have a fortified city because of the mountains, the area we live in. But we have plenty of treaties. We have nations that have our back. Also, we've been known to have a people that is very wise and very intelligent. And that really isn't bad things, right? Having treaties with nations, having a city that you feel safe in, and being wise. But what happened is it started as pride, and it swelled up, and it became what they did instead of relying on God. And they knew this. They knew that they should rely on God. They relied on themselves, thinking that they can handle it themselves because they're wise, they have a safe city, and they have treaties with the others. Thank you, Mallory, for that. So that's what started as pride. So what happened to them? Pride misled this nation. And not only did it mislead them, it leads this nation into more and more sin that we're going to see here in just a second. So their conceit started a downward spiral of sin, and it's only going to get worse and worse even as we read this next set of verses. So I do have another image I want to show you guys. So Edom, I use this description to talk about how they were. So what started probably pride in their nation and with their people started small. So I was a math teacher before, so I like to use illustrations and I like to show, especially when it comes to like math and things that make sense to me because I did math for 7 years. But 1 degree is this small. So if you use an angle, 1 degree is that small. So it's not very big. It's not very significant at first. But if you were to keep going, it's going to get farther and farther away from what it should. So if a boat is traveling on the water and it gets off by 1 degree, at first it's still pretty much on course. It's very close to on course, not very much difference. But the further you get, if you stay off 1 degree, you're going to get farther and farther and farther away from the course and the track where you're supposed to be heading. And that's what happened with Edom. They started, and it probably was like, hey, your people are smart. Like you have this city that you're surrounded by mountains. You form these treaties, all great things. But what happened is that developed pride in their nation, and what started as pride has continued to blow up and spiral into more and more sin. So even though it probably didn't start like that, sometimes in our life when we have sin or sins in our life, it's hard to notice because sometimes it so slowly creeps up on us, we don't even realize that we're so far off course because we've just been slowly heading that direction. And that's what happened with Edom, is they had pride, and it started about a downward spiral of sin, and they started small, but the further and the longer they did it, they just got farther and farther and farther away from what God wanted them to do, and to the point where they're really not relying on God at all. So they've kind of got away, and they're like, we got this ourselves. We can handle this. And we see that is what happened, and that is what brings about their downfall. So what we're going to look at next is we're going to look at how this continues. But does anybody have a question or comment about those first 9 verses that we see the judgment that Obadiah talks about with his people of Edom? Yes, ma'am.
When Jerusalem was destroyed, didn't they flee to Petra? Didn't they tell the people to flee to Petra?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And that's what we're reading here is the Babylonians have come into Judah and Jerusalem and destroying them. And we're going to see how they react, how this people react for that situation. But yes, ma'am.
Yeah, in like AD 70 or something like that.
Yes, ma'am.
The Christians fled to Petra.
Yes, ma'am. And they actually say, well, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that the judgment happened, that there's not even much record after AD 70 of the Edomites at all. So they were probably completely wiped out after that. Like there's no record of after AD 70 for them. Good question. Any other questions? Any comments about this first part, that we see this vision of the judgment that's going to come on Esau's descendants in Edom because of their arrogance and conceit and pride and sin? Yes, sir. The king of I don't. The king of Edom? No, sir. Good question, though. Any other questions for this first 9 verses? All right, let's jump on let's read verses 10 through 14. And this is titled Edom's Sins Against Judah. So we're going to see how they just continue to sin, and how they just continue to get farther and farther from the path that God would want for them because of their pride and arrogance. So verse 10 says this: you will be covered with shame and destroyed forever because of violence done to your brother Jacob. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day strangers captured his wealth, while foreigners entered his city gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were just like one of them. Do not gloat over your brother in the day of his calamity. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction. Do not boastfully mock in the day of distress. Do not enter my people's city gates in the day of their disaster. Yes, you, Do not gloat over their misery in the day of their disaster, and do not appropriate their possessions. In the day of their disaster, do not stand at the crossroads to cut off their fugitives, and do not hand over their survivors in the day of distress. So what happens here is Babylon has come in and has destroyed and has taken over Jerusalem. And what happens here is that Edom participates in that destruction and the downfall of Jerusalem and Judah. They jump in and help. So we know that Edom and Israel, Judah, are like brother nations. It describes it here. It's kind of like Isaac and Esau, not Isaac, Jacob and Esau were brothers. Edom and Israel are talked about as like brother nations because it's brothers that started that nations. We see they come from Isaac, but it talks about brothers helping in a time of distress. So here you'll see it talks about how you were to do this against your brother. So it's talking about Esau and Jacob. So it's talking about Edom, how they treated the nation of Judah and Israel during this time when Babylon's going to come in and take over and destroy Jerusalem and take stuff and really capture people and take them captive. So here it talks about Edom did not act in a way that a sibling should during a time of distress. So I told you guys I'm the youngest of four. I have an older brother, and so I have a brother. He's older than me, and we were your typical brothers. We roomed together for 16 years in the same room, so a lot happened in there. So you know what? We're typical brothers. I don't know if you have brothers or siblings that you fought with a lot, but we were the typical, like, we didn't get along all the time. So we fought over if the fan was going to be on at night while we slept, what the radio was going to be on if we were in the room, what side of the closet we get to put our clothes on, all those good things. We fought over those things as typical brothers would. We would play sports and basketball. We'd get mad at each other. But I know at the end of the day that as a brother and as part of my family, I know that he would have my back and he would help if I was in a time of distress, even today. Like, I know if he was in trouble, I would be there to help him. And this is talking about Edom, you are not acting in a way that a brother should, like a brother country should, a brother nation should. You are not helping. Actually, they're doing the exact opposite. So you're going to see in a second, we're going to walk through these things and kind of talk about a little more into detail what they're doing to Israel and Judah during this time of their distress. When Babylon comes in, how Edom not only is just like standing back, not doing nothing, but they're making it even worse. So they're not helping their brother nation. They're actually making it worse. So they show no concern for Judah during their time of trouble. And so what I want to do is I'm going to walk you through some of the things just to show you how pride has led to sin, and it's just a downward spiral of sins they're committing even in these 4 verses against Judah when they are captured by Babylon. So verse 11, it says this, "On the day you stood aloof, on the day strangers captured his wealth, while foreigners entered the city gate and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were just like one of them." So this is how it starts. So Edom, while Babylon was coming in and doing these bad things and capturing Judah and destroying Jerusalem, they were just standing there doing nothing. And we know in James, the Bible tells us if you know what's right and you do not do it, that is sin. And so we know that Edom is standing around doing nothing, watching this. But not only that, during this, it talks about while they were doing nothing and watching this happen, they decided to join in. So they were watching Judah, Babylon coming in, and they see the bad things were happening. And not only were they just watching it and sitting back, they're like, you know what? We're going to join in this distressful time, this troubled time that Babylon is doing and coming in and causing Judah. So that's what we see verse 11. They're doing nothing, but then they decide to do something, but that something is not good. It's actually worse. Verse 12 says this, "Do not gloat over your brother." So God is telling, do not gloat over your brother, talking about the nation of Judah and Jacob, in the day of his calamity. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction. Do not boastfully mock in the day of the distress. So not only did they sit back and do nothing, not only did they decide to join in, they started gloating, and it actually says delighting in Judah's suffering. So I don't know about you, but I can't imagine delighting over somebody else's suffering and trouble. So they were delighting and gloating over Judah's suffering that was happening. So they sat back and they looked with pride and arrogance and enjoyed seeing the destruction of Jerusalem and what was happening in Judah. So not only that, it just keeps going down and kind of keeps getting worse as we continue to read. Verse 13 says this: "Do not enter my people's city gates in the day of the disaster. Yes, you do not gloat over their misery in that day of their disaster, and do not appropriate their possessions in the day of their disaster." So what happened here is Edom continues to take advantage of Judah's misfortune. So here's how it was taught to me. Verse 13, kind of like a comparison to what is going on here. So Edom is going in and pretty much looting. So it's kind of like I was at Union in 2008 during the tornado that hit Union. And so this is a comparable action of like what they're doing here. So when I was in my room and I went down in our dorms got hit and they told us to get away from the dorm. So what this is comparable to is people coming in after a tornado hit and taking everything that they can and just leaving with it. So they're like, all right, Union's been hit by a tornado. Let's go in and see how much stuff we can get and leave with it. And that's exactly what Edom is doing here. They're like, you know what? They're distracted. They're being destroyed. The cities, they're not worried about it. We're going to go in and see how much stuff that we can take from Judah, from these people during this time while it's happening. So we see just this downward spiral. Like it just kind of keeps continuing to get worse and worse and worse how they're treating their brother nation of Judah. Verse 14 says this: "Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off their fugitives, and do not hand over their survivors in the day of their distress." So not only were they doing nothing, deciding to join in, gloating, delighting in their suffering, looting and taking their stuff during this time of distress, they also were, as people were trying to leave the city, they were capturing them and turning them over as slaves to Babylon and to other countries and nations. So not only were they doing that, they were capturing them themselves in some way, maybe even like harming, putting them in prison, or giving them over as slaves. So when people were trying to get out of this distress and this trouble that's going on in Judah, they were capturing those people and turning them over. So in no way is Edom trying to help. With their pride and arrogance, they're just like, hey, we're not gonna help. They're not worried about themselves. They're not worried about Judah. All they're doing is causing more issues. So we just see this pride that started turn into a downward spiral of sin, that they're not even worried about any of this stuff happening. They don't see what they're doing, how bad the stuff that they're doing actually is. And as they continue to do this during Judah's misfortune and destruction when Babylon came in for that. So we see that the first part, why God's doing this, is because of how their country's arrogance led to this sin right here. So does anybody have questions about those 5 verses, 10 through 14, about what's happening in Judah and how Edom participated in the sin that's happening from this people group during the book of Obadiah? Any questions about those verses? Yes, sir.
I see that God told Obadiah what was going to happen to him, and he's telling him here why. But I've got a question. For example, there's a lot of prophets, and looking at Jonah right next to it.
Uh-huh.
God came to Jonah and said, "Go preach to them and tell them that I'm going to pour out judgment on them for their sins." Because he says, that if they'll repent from their sin, then I won't pour out my judgment. But just seeing this, and it just occurred to me that he's not telling Obadiah to go preach to him.
Yeah.
It's a vision that God gave up. So I guess my question is kind of what's the purpose of God just telling Obadiah, hey, I'm going to do this to the city for what they did?
Yeah. So as I've studied this and looked into this more, it kind of was at a point where Edom was kind of like not too far gone, because we know that God can bring back anybody, but they were to that point like that they were not going to turn to God in any way. Like they were so full of themselves that they were not, even if it was preached to repent, turn away from your arrogance and this sin, they were kind of at the point where that wasn't even going to happen, because they didn't think God could touch them, and they didn't want to have, they relied on themselves instead of anything that God had for them. So I know in this book, it talks about just straight the judgment and the destruction, which it also is used, we're going to talk about in a second, to talk about restoration. But yeah, I think that they knew that God knew how they were going to react, that they were not going to turn from their ways, and there was nothing that was going to be done to do that. Because we were talking about that earlier about Jonah, that he preached to them and they did turn from their ways, even though Jonah didn't want that to happen. Here, these people, he just says, hey, this is what's going to happen because of what you've done. But I think they were just so far gone, they were not going to rely on God because they were just going to rely on themselves. And no matter what was said from Obadiah, that they were just going to continue on their path and not do anything to try to seek forgiveness or repent from their sins and turn from that. Great question, though. That is a good question. Yeah, it looks like there's no opportunity like that Obadiah is talking about for, like, hey, turn from your ways. But I think they were already to that point, like they weren't going to turn from their ways. And they were just going to continue just at kind of that spiral of just sin and worse sin and continue to sin. Good question, though. Great question.
Who was the people that God said their sin is not yet complete? That it said, do you remember that in the Old Testament?
I do, and I cannot remember the people that.
It's when Israel was coming up from Egypt, I think.
Yes, Philistines. I think Philistines. I don't want to say it and then be incorrect for that.
They were not allowed to go into the promised land because their time was not yet complete. So they went into Egypt for those years, and then they were allowed to come back.
Yes.
What I remember.
Okay.
I'll find it, but it's a people that resisted Israel, that God was holding back on judgment, and he said that their sin is not yet complete.
Yeah. Kind of like, and I feel like that's kind of along the lines of this, there's still a chance for them to turn back, or that there's still a chance that they might. If not, I'll make sure that we find that too. If we don't find that here, we'll make sure we.
There's a verse that God says, Jacob did I love, but Esau I hated. And that kind of bothered me, but then it was explained to me that God saw what Esau was going to do. And that was why he loved Jacob, even though he was punishing Jacob at this time.
Yes, ma'am.
But he hated Esau because of Esau's ways.
Yep, and that's what. Yeah, I mean, Esau is a prime example of how the Edomites were living, and that he knew that's what was going to happen with the people.
And I think there was a nation when they were coming out of Egypt that would not let them travel through. I think that was Edom.
You're exactly right. It was Edom, and that's actually the verse that talks about that God gave that land to them, but they would not let them pass through when they were traveling out.
God talked to him about that. He said, you wouldn't let your brother go through, you had to go around.
Yes, ma'am.
So there was that animosity between the two brothers.
Yep. Ever since, yeah, you see that ever since, like that Jacob stole the birthright. We see that all that happening in. I mean, that's as soon as Esau left. That's where he went and settled. Was this land where they are now? As soon as that happened. Yes, good comments, great questions. Anything else about those verses?
It was the
Amorites?
Amorites.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in Genesis, I think, 15.
Awesome. Well, thank you for answering that. Thank you for finding that.
Do you think it's still bad blood between these two nations, no kind of bad blood between Jacob and Esau?
I feel like that area, yes. What we've read about this is like the majority of them, like it says that they're going to be completely wiped out, and they were completely wiped out. But I feel like there's still that remnant there of just that bad blood, like that was right here in this Esau and Jacob as well. Because the area that they were in is kind of the areas that we see lots of confrontation and things going on even today. Any other comments or questions about 11 through 14? All right, let's continue on. We're going to look at 15 through 18. This one, it's titled Judgment of the Nations. So we see what all has happened up to this point, and then we're going to jump in and see what's going to happen in talking about judgment of not just Edom, but different nations that have sinned against Israel. For the day of the Lord is near against all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. What you deserve will return on your own head. As you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and gulp down and be as though they had never been. But there will be a deliverance on Mount Zion, and it will be holy. The house of Jacob will dispossess those who dispossess them. Then the house of Jacob will be a blazing fire, and the house of Joseph a burning flame. But the house of Esau will be stubble. Jacob will set them on fire and consume Eden. Therefore, no survivor will remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So what we see here is it starts off saying the day of the Lord, referring to the time when every nation will be judged, and those that sin against Israel will receive retribution for their sin against God's chosen people. Edom, it says here, will be wiped out, and every nation, not just Edom, but every nation that has sinned against Israel and insulted them will be judged in the day of the Lord. So that's what we see as it starts here in verse 15, is not just Edom, but every nation that has sinned against. And that's talking about every nation then until Jesus comes back will receive retribution for their sins against Israel, and they will be judged. Verse 16 talks about, it uses the description of drinking on the holy mountain, but it uses it two different ways. So it talks about Edom drinking and celebrating as Judah was getting destroyed. Then it also talks about the cup that they're going to receive, that they're going to drink, and that's God's judgment for their sin and for their arrogance and for their pride. So we see it two ways here. We see that they are celebrated because of Judah, but we also see that the cup that they're going to drink is with the judgment that they're going to receive because of what they've done, the judgment from God. So we see that here in verse 16. That's what it's talking about as it compares drinking on the holy mountain as they celebrated, but they're going to go up down the judgment that they will receive from God for the way they treated Israel. Verse 17 talks about here, but there will be deliverance on Mount Zion, and it will be holy. The house of Jacob will dispossess those who dispossess them. So it speaks of deliverance. We start here to see the deliverance. So we kind of start to see it turn here. We start to see it, the judgment of Edom and what's happened to them and their sins. But we start to see here what's going to happen to Judah and to Israel. And here it says, deliverance for Israel, the surviving remnant. So those that are delivered from captivity and from Babylon and all these countries, nations that have come in, they're going to take back the land that belongs to them, that God had promised to them. So the deliverance of Israel, the surviving ones will not only take back the land, but it says they will be holy. So that means they're going to seek to do what's right. They're going to come back and they're going to be on the right path, and they're going to stay on that path and live how God wanted his chosen people to live as he gives back the land that was promised to them, is verse 17. Then it says in verse 18, then the house of Jacob will be a blazing fire, the house of Joseph a burning flame, but the house of Esau will be stubble. So God is going to use Israel to destroy the enemies, including Edom. And it says the Edomites will be no more. So it said they will be but stubble. And Jacob will set them on fire and consume Edom. Therefore, no survivor will remain in the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So we see the turn of the judgment of Edom, but then also the restoration of Israel starting. So we see that God is going to judge Edom and the descendants of Esau, but we see that God is going to restore his chosen people, just as he said he would. He'll bring them back to him, that they will receive the land that God promised to them, and they will be his holy people again. So any questions about those verses 15 through 18, as we kind of turn from, we're seeing what's going to happen to Edom, so we're going to see what's going to happen to Israel as well through Jacob. Any questions about that set of verses? Questions or comments?
You think that comment you made about Israel being holy, is that a reference, a future reference to the day of the Lord when the Lord comes back and he sets up everything on Mount Zion,
Yes, sir. I think this one in this passage, I think it's mainly referring to that the remnant of the people that were going to survive. And when they come back, it's going to be a lot of the people that were not relying on God, that kept worshiping idols and bringing so many other things in, that it was referring to that set of people that are going to come back, and they're going to be seeking God with all their heart. So, of course, not perfect, but they were going to be on track to being holy, how God wanted his people to be, how they were, and then what they got away from. So I think it's mainly just referring to this group of people that are going to be delivered, that come back, that God's going to give this land back to them, and they're going to regain the land that God promised to them. And that was the people that were going to be holy, and he was going to use that to start back again for that nation with that remnant of people that were delivered. Great question. Any other questions, 15 through 18? All right, well, let's look at this. I have a few more verses. We're going to do this last part, the 3 verses, and I would love to talk about just a little bit of like application, things that God has taught me through studying this that I would like to share with you guys as well after we do this last 3 verses. So the last 3 verses are 19 through 21. And my Bible titles these last 3 verses, The Future Blessings for Israel. And here's what it says. People from the Negev will possess. Now, when it says Negev, that's the southern part of, so that's when we showed the map up there and it had Israel and Judah. This is part, the Negev is just another name for the southern part of Judah, so that land. So people from the Negev will possess the hill country of Esau. So it's just saying the people of Judah will come back and they will take Edom, so the hillside of Esau. From those Judean foothills, those from the Judean foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will possess the territories of Ephraim, Samaria, while Benjamin will possess Gilead. The exiles of the Israelites who are in Hala and who are among the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, as well as the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Zephirad, will possess the cities of the Negev. Saviors will ascend Mount Zion to rule over the hill country of Esau, but the kingdom will be the Lord's. So really what all that is saying is that God promises the restoration of Israel, and in that, they're going to regain the land that was promised to them. So they're getting back the land they took from the Canaanites is going to come back to them. Because we see now how it's being kind of like divided up and it's not all theirs. He's saying, I will restore my people using this remnant that has survived, that has been delivered. And also, you will get the land that was originally promised to you, the land that you took from the Canaanites. So that's when it describes or goes through that list of lands and territories. It's just God saying, you will get back the lands that were promised to you as well. Then in verse 21, it says, saviors, and when it uses the word, I don't know if y'all says the same thing. Does anybody say something different for verse 21? Saviors? Delivers, yes, that's exactly right. That's what it is. Savior just means those who have been delivered will rule over the hillside of Esau, which is Edom. But I love how it ends here, how it talks about like the deliverers, those that have been delivered, the remnant that is left that God's going to use will rule over that area that God has wiped out the Edomites. But he reminds them, I think this is just a reminder because of what Edom did and how arrogant they were, but he reminds them, you're going to rule over that, but I'm still ruling over everything. Like, I'm still the one in charge. I'm still going to rule over all. So don't forget that as you get this land back that I helped you get, that I promised you. It ends by saying, but the kingdom will be the Lord. So not forgetting who is really the ruler over all, who is the ruler over all this, who gave you that land. Don't ever lose sight of that. So I think that is the end of the vision that God gave Obadiah, just as a reminder. Don't let pride sneak in on you guys as well. Don't let that arrogance start just like it did Edom and the descendants of Esau. Don't forget, you will rule over this just like I promised you, but don't forget who rules over it all. And he's like, that's me. Like, I rule over everything. Does anybody have any questions or comments about those last verses as we see that God promises restoration for the Israelites and they will get back the land that he promised to them? They will take over the land of Edom that was taken for them because of their sin and their arrogance and pride. But any questions about those 3 verses? Awesome. Well, I'd like to share. This is some things as I was studying this, as I've studied the book of Obadiah, that things that were good reminders. So a lot of times we can look at God's word and we can learn from people. We can learn people that have walked like Jesus and lived how they should. And we also can learn from people that made mistakes. So we can learn from the mistakes of others as well. So as we look at Edom, even though they were people that were judged, we can learn from the mistakes that they made and not repeat those mistakes. So some reminders that I've taken from the book of Obadiah is God is still on the throne and he's still in charge. So no matter how great our country is, no matter how smart our people are, no matter what allies we have, we always need to make sure we rely on God as an individual, as a church, as a nation, which is not all on us, but that's just the reminder that we see here is that God is still in charge. He's still on the throne. It's not a country that's in charge. It's not a ruler that's in charge. It's not a people that's in charge. He's still in charge. And that's just a reminder that we see here in the book of Obadiah. Another one is, apart from God, we could do nothing. So we can see the people of Obadiah, the people in the Obadiah talked about, the Edomites. We see how they tried to rely on themselves, and we see where that led to. We see the pride that led to their destruction and their fall. But we know apart from God, apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ, we can do nothing. We can do nothing on our own. We need God. So that's just a reminder for me that I took away as I read this, and also that God promises his restoration, the restoration of Israel. But he also, if you're a child of God and you're a believer, then God promises us restoration as well. So we know one day Jesus will come back and we will be restored and made holy, just like his son, Jesus Christ. And we know that is going to happen. So even if we go through things here, we know that one day we have the promise and the hope of restoration that God gives all his children. Is there anything else like that, as you just heard this, or maybe you know the book of Obadiah, you've heard again, something that you could think about that would be a takeaway for you, that we could be like, hey, this is something that stood out to me from this book, these 21 verses, that is just an important reminder. Maybe something that came up as we were discussing through. Maybe it's something you've already read before or thought about in the book of Obadiah. But anything, because I feel like sometimes as you read it, maybe God spoke to you in a way that something stood out that you could share with somebody else. That could be a great reminder to learn through this book of Obadiah.
I thought of something that Russ said in his sermon Sunday, and it was right at the beginning, and it wasn't his main point, but he said, we can't put our hope in governments.
Mm-hmm.
We can't put our hope in politics, because only God can change the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like the Edomites were putting their hope in their government.
Yes, ma'am.
And their education.
Yes, ma'am, that's exactly right. Yeah, the things really that God blessed them with is where they were putting their hope in instead of putting their hope in him. So you're right. The things of this earth. That's a great comparison to add on to what Russ said on Sunday. What else? Anything else that stood out to you that maybe could be a good reminder for us all? Yes, ma'am.
So a couple of things that, going through life today and applying this, it's all about waiting and waiting on God to make the decision rather than for us to press forward and make our own, thinking that we're rushed through the world and that we have to make this decision. If we just get out of God's way and be patient and be waiting and just serving him, that there's a better answer that comes than if we try to do it our own.
Yes, ma'am. I agree. That's a great word. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else, anything stuck out to you that you could think about that we could use for application as we look at this Old Testament book, Obadiah? Yes, ma'am. Yes. As you read this, it does bring, you start thinking about, it's not just this time, it's you think of so many things that are happening, that's so similar to things today, situations in our nation today. Yes, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
God's judgment is swift, it's holy, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 15, our mind says, for the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you.
Mm-hmm.
Your dealings will return on your own head. It's kind of like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have.
Yeah.
You just think
Yes, ma'am.
what they've done, they deserve
Yes, ma'am.
judgment.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, sin's a serious thing, and it's going to be judged. We'll receive sin. Sin comes with punishment. Anybody else? Something that stuck out, or? I'm going to share one more thing that just as it was a challenge that I've got to share this with some of the students before, so this was kind of one of the challenges I left them with, but was don't let pride and arrogance create a foothold for Satan in your life, because we see that's what happened here with Edom, is the pride and arrogance and conceit just started small, and then it just kind of amplified and went out of control from there. So it can be so easy. I feel like pride is one of those that, like, most people can say that there's some pride in their life, and that's just hard because, I mean, we like to be right. We like to think we know what's best, and pride can sneak up on us, but don't let that become a foothold for Satan in your life. The Bible tells us to humble ourselves before God, seek forgiveness, and rely on Him. We see that's not what Edom did, but we don't have to make that mistake again. If there is a situation where we get caught up in arrogance and conceit and pride, all we need to do is that's what we need to do. We need to step back, humble ourselves, ask for forgiveness when necessary, and then turn back to Jesus. Because pride can just create a downward spiral of sin, and we can get caught in the trap just like Edomites did and that Edom did during this time. But it can be easy to always think about it, that we got it on our own. And especially when, I think Pastor Russ even talked about this on Sunday, like when things are going good, sometimes it's harder to rely on God because we think we got it and we got it under control. And that's what was happening here. They thought they had it under control and it was all, they got this. But it's then when it can be dangerous because then we start to stop relying on God, or we stop focusing on Him or seeking Him as much as we should because we think we got it figured out. But don't let pride hinder your relationship with Jesus Christ and the plans that He has for you. So I know as I read that, that's a word to myself. So I thought I would share that as well, as I shared with the students one time when I've done this, and with you guys as well. But I think that's something we always got to pray for, is like the God humble me, because I feel like that's nothing that comes. It's usually easy. It's not natural for us to be humble, but we got to pray for that. That's when we know God hates pride, but He exalts those that are humble. So we got to pray that we can remain humble, that we can seek God and rely on Him in all things. Any other comments as we get ready to close out? Anything else about the book of Obadiah? I love it. I'm telling you, it's so weird, y'all. I love it that y'all been listening and focused and making eye contact. It's a lot different than middle schoolers teaching. So this has been great. So thank y'all so much. Thank y'all for having me and let me be a part of y'all's this Bible study tonight. I would love to close this out with prayer. If you have any questions or anything, always feel free to come ask. If you ever need me, a lot of times I'm over there at that building at the warehouse, or you'll see me up front in church. But I would love it to talk with you more about anything. So if you ever have any questions or anything, feel free to come ask. But I'll pray for us as we get ready to close out. Dear God, we thank you for today. We thank you for every day, God. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for sending your Son, Jesus, so that we could have forgiveness of sins and so we could have eternal life through your Son, Jesus. Dear God, I just pray that as your church, in our own lives, in our groups at Englewood, and as a church, dear God, that we would seek humility, that we would strive to be humble in our relationship with you and with others, and that we would seek you in all things, fully relying on you, not trying to do things ourselves and rely on ourselves and the gifts and talents that you've given us and the things that you've surrounded us with on this earth, but that we would fully rely on you. Don't let Satan get a foothold. Don't let us get trapped in sin and slowly walk away from you. Help us to stay on course. Help us to seek you with all our heart in everything that we do, individually in our own lives and as a church at Englewood here in Jackson. Help us just to be, dear God, a church that seeks you, and that when people see us, they don't see pride and arrogance. They see love and they see humility, and it points back to you. It's all because of you. So I just pray that we would be a church that loves well, that we would humbly serve our community and the people around us, and not even here, just all over the world as we go out and send teams, that we would be humble, that we would have humility as we go out and serve and love others, giving you the glory, pointing them to you, letting everything we do point to you. We thank you. Thank you for each member and person that's in here today, and I just pray that you guide them, help them this week, continue to have the strength to do what's right, the wisdom to seek you and to know what to do each day and each decision, seeking you in everything. And we love you. We thank you, and I pray that we would just continue to love you, love others, and serve the world in every place, every day. In your wonderful name, Jesus, amen. All right, thanks, y'all.